final presentation in this parallel session is by Matt Cannon, who will be speaking on collaboration, integration and partnerships advances in PNG. Now I must say, looking through his bio, he's come a long way in a very short time. In 2008 he was Young Citizen of the Year in Sydney. 2009 he was in a National Student Leadership Forum. 2010 a Rotary Youth Leadership Award. Then in 2014 he's off to Canada with a research grant and working as a ministerial liaison officer for the New South Wales Minister of Health. Then he goes as special envoy to help the St John's PNG Pacific Games in 2015, and whether that was a wise move or not I don't know, because what then happens is they don't let him go home, and he becomes the manager reform and strategy of PNG as St John's, and the following year Chief Staff Officer. And if that isn't then enough to occupy him, he decides to be an adjunct lecturer at Charles Sturt University and a casual tutor at the Australian Catholic University. So I'm tired just thinking about that. Anyway, would you please welcome Matt Cannon to speak on collaboration, integration and partnerships.
Those bios are always embarrassing, I think. But I just want to start, I think it's the end of the day, so I thought that I'd get everyone to stand up if you like chocolate. So if you like chocolate, can everyone stand up? And Papua New Guinea is very well known for its chocolate, so I thought that I'd bring some along, not knowing how many people would be present. So if you don't like dark chocolate, can you sit down? Okay, well I have chocolate here, so why don't you come forward and I'll give you all a piece of chocolate. I think that's going to be the best way. And I figure it's the 101 of presenting late in the afternoon is get everyone on their feet and eating, so. So the presentation today is on advancing paramedicine in Papua New Guinea. Through collaborations and partnerships, which I guess is the theme for the conference. I think it's quite important whenever doing a presentation like this to bring it back to a patient-centered solution or a patient-centered focus to really underpin what we do. And with the full permission of the patient here, Janet, I've put up a photo of Janet and her young baby. At that point, I think about 1 or 2 weeks old. Janet's a 19-year-old girl who is completing grade 9 at school, and you might wonder why. And in PNG it's not uncommon for people to attend those years of education quite late on in their life. So she missed out on opportunities, so she's gone back to school as an adult. While she was in school she got pregnant and with her boyfriend or partner, and has taken some time off school. So she went back to the village at 37 weeks gestation. Probably a 3-hour drive from Port Moresby. Where she lives is a beautiful place, but it's on a river, and that week the river had flooded. She was due to go into labour at any point, but something happened suddenly that made that a little bit unexpected. Janet went outside after some heavy rain and slipped over and fell onto her bottom, and that process caused her membranes to rupture. She embarked upon a 30-hour journey to a clinic that had two very experienced senior registered nurses on duty that day, but were resource challenged. Those nurses identified that she was critically unwell, 30 hours going into labour, with no delivery of the baby in sight. We got a phone call in Port Moresby to ask us to send an ambulance up to retrieve her, and we were just told she's very unwell. That day my control centre identified how unwell the patient was, gave me a call and asked if I'd also attend, which I did. And that was 7 p.m. at night, and I had my groceries in one hand because I just finished my shopping for that night, and a nice juicy beautiful steak that I was really wanting to eat. We convoyed out to the clinic in Brown River. When I arrived there was probably one of the sickest patients, and certainly as a paramedic in New South Wales ambulance, from my experience as a registered nurse, I've done about, I don't know, gather collectively 20 hours of training in obstetrics. So this is a job that is a very serious case that isn't even in the training really as obstetric training that I've done. So I arrived and Janet's there in extreme pain. She's looking unwell. Her blood pressure's 120, her pulse rate's 120, her temperature's 38.5. She's got a rigid abdomen and looking critically unwell. using what I have available in my paramedic skills, I came up with a plan to treat her, and that plan was confirmed via voice conversation with our medical director for the day. IV antibiotics, Maxilon for hematemesis. She'd had multiple vomits of blood, and IV antibiotics, and all we carried at that point was benzyl penicillin for meningococcal septicemia, and as well as IV fluids. We established that, and she was a lot more calm, and the screaming stopped, and she was all right. We embarked upon the 4-hour journey, three to 4 hour drive on a bumpy, unmaintained, sealed road to the General Hospital in Port Moresby. My initial gut feeling was Janet wasn't going to make it, and that it was too late for the baby. When we were about an hour out of Port Moresby on this road, we have brand new we have Life Pack 12s fully optioned thanks to Queensland Ambulance Service, and they're upgrading to a different version. We've got now in total I think 28 for the service. So she was monitored the whole time with end-tidal CO2, NIBP. What we noticed very quickly is that her blood pressure went from 120 suddenly over 5 minutes to 90. So she's in decompensating shock. We pulled over and initiated another IV and gave another a litre of fluid. And we made it with her alive to Port Moresby General. For me, it was following up 5 days later with the expectation that things wouldn't be good. To walk in and find the proudest moment of my career was to see a healthy mum and a healthy baby delivered. And I reflected upon that case, and it really drove in what it is for me that we're trying to achieve in PNG. What I saw that day was simply if St. John Ambulance was not in that country, this young woman would have died. She would have been left in the clinic and passed a very painful, uncomfortable death, vomiting blood and in severe pain. The clinic, although the nurses are fantastic, for whatever reason, didn't have what they normally should have when it comes to basic medications like antibiotics and morphine. So young Janet is alive because of what St John Ambulance does, and it's not unique to PNG. It's all over the 43 countries that St John operates. These sort of stories go too often untold, I think, by an organisation that focuses heavily on first aid and forgets that globally its ambulance services do a remarkable job every single day. So Janet's alive because of what our ambulance service in PNG does. She's also alive, I guess. She may not have made it to hospital with that sudden drop in decompensating shock if it wasn't for paramedic care. Now, I'm no whiz-bang paramedic. I've done a nursing degree and I've got a diploma in paramedical science, and I've been at that point a paramedic for 6 years. And I think what that showed me is with the things that we have in our kits as paramedics, we can make a big difference. So that really reinforced for us what we need to do in PNG. So to give you a bit of context, PNG is our closest neighbour. It's 3.5 kilometres from the Australian border, has a population of 8 million people. It's a country rich in natural resources. There is a lot of money, and they say if you dig a hole, you make money. It's a fertile land, so there's no starvation like you see in some third world countries in drought-prone areas. People don't starve there, and they maybe get malnourished because there's too much readily available Coca-Cola and deep-fried chicken, but people don't starve there. There's a lot of money, but it's not always in the right places. It has the poorest health outcomes in the region. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and I don't just think it's economical. It has an economy, and it has a strong-ish economy that is in a downward spiral, but the health outcomes have been well beyond that downward spiral in the economy. Australia government gives about 500 million Australian dollars worth of aid, so $500 million. It's our largest aid donor recipient. And PNG, for those who are a bit older than me, I probably remember that PNG was Australian soil only 40 years ago. So it was a Commonwealth, it was a territory of Australia. Still is a Commonwealth country, and still feels a little bit like Australia. So when we look at poor population health statistics, we have a maternal mortality rate of 2.33. So for every 100 women that get pregnant, 3 won't make it through the pregnancy, they will die. When it comes to infant mortality rate, 5 won't live to see their second birthday. Snakebite, there's 1,000 per year, and we compare that to, if we compare that to Australia, where there's a population 3 times of PNG, we have 1 death a year recorded, and usually that's someone stuck on a remote plantation with no help available. In PNG, it's 3 per day that are recorded. And a troubling statistic because it's a completely preventable cause of death. If we compare that to Australia, where there's a population 4 times of PNG, we have 1 death a year recorded, and usually that's someone stuck on a remote plantation with no help available. In PNG, it's 3 per day that are recorded. And a troubling statistic because it's a completely preventable cause of death. When we look at what facilities there is in Moresby, there's a tertiary hospital in Port Moresby, and I'll show you on this. Port Moresby's in the middle, and Papua New Guinea is all those islands right to the Solomon Sea. Let's see if I can get my laser to work. So Papua New Guinea is here with East New Britain and other islands just off the coast. So down the middle of Papua New Guinea is the Highlands region, encompassing about half the population, 4 million people is in this region, and we have about 1.5 million people in the Moresby Central Province area. Servicing the Moresby Central Province area is what we do, service to about 1.5 million people, although our call volume isn't comparable to a city in Australia or New Zealand with a population of 1.5 million. It's substantially less for a number of reasons. When we look at Port Moresby General Hospital, it's a tertiary hospital with all the facilities that you'd imagine need to be in a tertiary hospital, and they handle trauma quite well with the resources they've got available. So if we can get patients alive to Port Moresby General, we buy them a very good chance. And I can think of a lot of cases where it was touch and go, even if I was bringing them to Royal North Shore Hospital, where I've had patients that were backed up and gone, I don't know if this gentleman would live, but Port Moresby General's managed to sustain life in some critically unwell patients from my observation. So St John over there, sicker than the Reading, 60 years this year. Initially established by the New South Wales branch. It's a statutory body governed by an Act of Parliament. It took over the ambulance service for the Department of Health in 1983. Since then, it's been through a number of challenges, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those challenges. It's a strong community support. It's a trusted organisation, but it's had financial challenges, some self-inflicted and some inflicted upon by economic changes. It's well established over there, but as I said, management and governance challenges. So they're well integrated into police and emergency services. Our service quite right now, for a number of reasons, has become very NCD or capital district centric, Port Moresby and the Central Province. So when I went over there, as you heard, I went for the Pacific Games, I heard there were some problems and they needed some help, and I put my hand up and then stayed there for a month and said, I'll come back if you need help. And they said, we'd love you to come back. And I went back for 3 months, and that turned into 6. And I was then fortunate. I went back to my home ambulance service and worked there for 6 months or a couple of months. I went back over to Port Moresby for the ambulance ball, and the chair of the board pulled me into a private meeting and said she'd like me to come back full time and she'll sort out appropriate expenses and allowances and salary to do that. And I thought about it for a couple of weeks and called her up and said, I'll take it. I think it's a good thing. So I'm there on a 2.5 year secondment. So I'm on a leave without pay arrangement and working over there to try to implement some changes. And then the key thing for me is making those changes sustainable, because I think the biggest challenge for that country has been great things happen and then those people that led those changes leave. So what we've identified with that is the need for this being a St John Australia-led initiative or a St John regional-led initiative. And I think what I've noticed, having worked over there, being a member of St John, New South Wales for 16 years, and I've seen how capable St John is. I mean, it's the only organisation of its kind with 900 years of history. And it's gone through greater challenges than what the organisation is going through now. But the problem when we abandon our Pacific Island regions is if they fall apart, it reflects poorly. We see at the moment NGOs like MSF that have only recently started in comparison to Australia taking off, and we see NGOs like Red Cross. The difference and the success beyond for those organisations is that they do still have a strong governance and a strong leadership from an international level. And what I've seen in PNG is because there wasn't that, the way it was set up and the way that St John entities are set up, some work exceptionally well. New Zealand, for example, Western Australia, Northern Territory. Some of the challenges that are faced in Pacific Island regions need the support of St John International, especially during great change. So when we arrived, we set a vision for the organisation, and that was that every village will have access to quality ambulance and pre-hospital care, and will promote community resilience through first aid. And that's a realistic topic. We're not saying that our response time will be 5 minutes to every single village, but we're saying that we'll be able to connect them with hospital care as it's required, and that will promote community resilience through first aid training. And one of those first aid training things is when I got there, they were teaching the Australian courses, and I asked, well, how many EpiPens are there in PNG, and no one knew the answer. And I said, how about how many defibrillators? And no one knew the answer. So what we were teaching was, you have a wound, you bandage it and take the patient to hospital. It's not a reality for about 7.5 million people in PNG. They don't have a pharmacy on the corner, and a bandage costs about 2 hours' wage. So what we looked at is, well, what are the challenges, and how can first aid be contextualised from a Western context to the challenges in the Pacific Island region? And we developed some courses that taught first aid using, boil some water, add some salt, clean the wound, boil a banana leaf and cover the wound with a banana leaf, and repeat that process every day. And if there's signs of infection, well, then you need to go to your health facility where they'll look at it and maybe prescribe some antibiotics. So it was realistic, and that's certainly a sustainable community empowerment tool, rather than teaching them and giving them a couple of bandages and things like that. So that's where we've driven that vision from, and we're aiming for that vision to be in place by 2025. We've set focuses of patient-centered outcomes, patient-centered care that are outcomes driven, and again, contextualised to PNG context. We're not addressing cardiac care, and we're not addressing cardiac arrest survival in PNG. We're looking at maternal and infant mortality, and they're our key benchmarks, and they're the outcomes we're aiming for, not a 30% survival in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. We're looking at sustainable solutions, staff-focused initiatives, and I'll talk about a partnership we've got, integrated and aligned with other health and emergency services. So at the moment, everyone works in silos, and we're breaking down those barriers. And there's been a few catalysts that have broken down those barriers for the better. And also we want to continue to be a trusted organisation, and we'd love to have that someone come and do a test like in New Zealand that shows St John's the most trusted brand and has been for a long time. We have a feeling that that's the case in PNG, but we've got no one to tell us. And if we're not, we damn well want to be the best and the most trusted, and really work towards earning community trust there. We've got some clinical initiatives, so really our programs at the moment are aimed at delivering improving patient outcomes through quality care. That's a wishy-washy one, but it makes sense to, I think, all of us in the room, but maybe not to our stakeholders. Reducing maternal and infant mortality through advanced pre-hospital obstetric training, that makes sense to our stakeholders. Certainly improving care for people in police situations. We've got the access that people have in a police custody is limited, and definitely not something that we'd be comfortable with in Australia. And we're looking at ways, working with the police, that we can break down those barriers. We get called to police situations multiple times per day, and we'd like to be able to deliver a better level of care to people that are currently in police custody. Also providing effective care to trauma patients. We know that based on the World Health Organization that trauma is set to overtake infectious disease as the leading cause of death by 2030. And we're looking at ways that we can help with the burden of trauma in communities, whether it's promoting safe driving practices, or wear a seatbelt, or don't drink and drive, right through to being able to respond when people are badly injured by trauma. And as you probably read, if you Google PNG and type next to it ABC News, probably every story is going to be about violence in communities and violence and trauma. And there is a lot of it that goes on. And we're looking at ways that while we as an organisation might not be able to reduce that trauma, we can reduce the burden of it through improving access to healthcare. And unfortunately, a lot of those traumas where people might be stabbed or shot, they're held in police custody. So we need to be able to get to people with bullets potentially still in them while in police custody for duration of time, and provide some sort of life-sustaining treatment while they're being processed by the police, or advocate for the patient to go to a hospital. Early treatment of emergency situations at the scene. And then also providing support. So essentially outside of Port Moresby, there's about 10 to 20 health centres. And all those health centres I class as the pre-hospital environment. They're staffed by a nurse or a community healthcare worker. So as far as we're concerned, they're still pre-hospital. So, we are looking at ways that our paramedics can go to those health centres and promote or assist with the treatment of patients. So when I arrived, this was the communications centre, and this was 111, and it was on 3 mobile phones. And it had digressed. St John over there used to have a PABX and a whole lot of other things, but obviously some individuals had been left and some other individuals forcefully removed from the organisation and had left behind an unsustainable solution. And that's what I first walked into on my first day, was a sort of a poorly set up system of prepaid mobile phones that would often run out of credit, and only one customer could get through, and it was bad. So over the last 2 years we've gone to this with 2 to 3 call takers, a dispatcher and the hosted PABX, and I haven't probably spent more than 10,000 New Zealand dollars on this, thanks to sponsorship. So some of the challenges we faced were communications. Clinical capability was essentially a primary first aid course, not even a senior first aid course when I first arrived. Operational capability was limited. There were business systems that weren't in place, and audits hadn't been done for a decade, and the organisation was about to lose the ability to call themselves St John. It had digressed to such a, deteriorated to such a poor state. Marketing was bad. I mean, these guys were doing incredible work and not realising it, and too humble to say to the media, hey, we just pulled 5 people out from a wreckage of a bus, or we just did this and that. And so because of that, people didn't understand what St John does, and we were widely not recognised and not receiving the support because we weren't telling people what we were doing. We weren't reporting on what we were doing, and we weren't saying this year we attended to 20,000 patients in NCD, and of those 200 or 2,000 were pregnant women that, had we not arrived, they would have passed away and contributed to the poor health statistics. And the other thing was we were applying an Australian model of first aid service delivery. So first aid training was your senior first aid, and it's just not relevant in PNG, and nor is it sustainable. The exception to that is where we're providing it to a big oil company or a high commission or an international organisation that does have defibrillators and does have first aid kits. But for the majority of their workers, we're now saying, look, we'll deliver this solution for you, but we'd also like to spend an extra day doing our village first aid program that we developed that looks at things that you and I would have learnt in our school courses, cover your mouth when you cough, brush your teeth twice a day, right through to some first aid principles about simple things that roll the patient on their side if they're unconscious. We're not in village first aid, we don't teach CPR. We teach things that are really relevant to that. If people want to do CPR, we encourage them to do the senior first aid course. And we also looked at, as I said to you earlier, that sort of wound care thing. And funding was a massive challenge, and it's a big challenge in PNG where organisations run out of money. And governments do release the money, but it can take sometimes 6 weeks for that money to come through. And we've certainly still have challenges like that where cash flow is a problem. So some of the obstacles that we faced was asking our partners to come on board a sinking ship. And no one wants to board a sinking ship. So we had to rebuild a ship, and we're so fortunate that crazy people like me have jumped on a sinking ship and plugged holes. And even reaching out to St John Australia, they were hesitant to provide support initially, but they did. They were with caution, and I think even I approached it with a lot of caution initially. But we've jumped on this sinking ship, and I think we've got it floating. I'm not going to tell you it's unsinkable, and I'm not going to tell you that I think we've all learnt you never say a ship's unsinkable. Is that a lesson from the Titanic? But we're not going to say it's unsinkable, but we're going to say that it's a ship that's seaworthy at the moment after 2 years of work. Government systems are a challenge there. Because of the previous management, there was a lot of distrust from Treasury and a lot of distrust from the Department of Health. And the other obstacle was finding the role of paramedicine in PNG. So as I said to you earlier, that the service delivery model of a paramedic that focuses on ACLS is not appropriate for PNG. The health challenges in PNG aren't managing stroke and cardiac, they're managing infant and maternal. Oh, had a little thing there. So I did want to focus on our strengths and make the rest of the presentation really positive. So our strengths were a well-recognised organisation with international support, and people do want to get on when you use the St John brand name. We had a good foundation. We have brilliant support now from the doctors, the healthcare professionals, and the senior doctors in the country, and they're pushing us. You know, the first thing we did when I got over there was appoint the government chief of emergency medicine as our medical director, and he's never been prouder. He drives around with St John, you know, badges and things like that, and was very proud to get on board. And that says a lot about the St John brand name. Strong media interest. We get a great following in media, and we're now in the media that they're happy that there's someone that's going to engage with them, and carefully engaging with them rather. And I've learned a lot of lessons on the way with media engagement about, you know, negative stories don't get you as much support as a positive story, and how I tone my conversations in the media is incredibly important to getting support. With APEC coming up in 2018, APEC starts in October this year, and the World Leaders Summit's in 2018. It's going to be a massive challenge for PNG, and from that, for the last year and a half, we've engaged in the Joint Security Task Force, and that's created strong connections with other agencies and really has made getting improvement a lot easier. And through my connections with St John Australia and connections with New South Wales Ambulance, Charles Sturt University, and through SAS, we're hopeful that the future is going to look brighter. So I looked at our partnerships. So we think about 1.5 million, probably about $1 million Australian dollars worth of sponsorship in a 1 year from Digicel. And they were the first people to come on board and put their hand up. And they've donated, they've connected all our managers with phones and internet, and everything over there is 4G. So no one's really got a Telstra broadband at home. It's a 4G. They've now just completed the major fit out of PABX on our phone network and host now our 111 service. And I just can't speak highly enough of. They came on board what they knew was a sinking ship and made it float. So our first challenge was communication, and we did that through partnerships. Through partnerships, or more relationships, I'll call them, we had colleagues that came over that were, you know, paramedics who also were chartered accountants, or paramedics that were actuaries, and have come over and given their time as volunteers to get the financial systems done. And because of that, one of the second thing we did once we got communication sorted was our financial reports. And I'm pleased to say that 2014 and 2015 audits were qualified, so the bad one, and the 2016, which is after we implemented all these changes, was an unqualified report. So to have that is a big achievement, and it's certainly redrawn a lot of interest, and especially the re-engagement of. It's resulted directly in the re-engagement of St John International in the organisation, and they're now investing heavily in time and support. Collaboration, so New South Wales Ambulance has just been over to PNG, and we're signing a letter of agreement, I'm told, with New South Wales Ambulance to facilitate clinical education and ongoing education opportunities. So pictured here is Phil Proust, Alan Morrison, who's the Director of Education for New South Wales Ambulance, our First Aid Services Director, and Jacinta Young, who's a paramedic educator with Ambulance. So they're currently concluding. Phil leaves tomorrow, and they conclude their the first paramedic program in PNG and the first EMT program in PNG. I'll talk more about that, but I am running out of time. Ambulance education collaboration has been the launching of a paramedic program. We're not creating a New South Wales Ambulance ICP or a Melbourne MICA paramedic. It's not what we're setting out to do. There'll be shared skills, but these paramedics are being taught by initially the core paramedic skills by paramedics, and the remainder of the skills is being taught by the medical profession. And why are we doing that? Because we don't have a paramedic profession over there to teach. We're really pioneering and demonstrating, adapting paramedicine to fill the void in healthcare in PNG. So we're looking at paramedicine being contextualised from what you and I know it in the Western world, which was set up to attend to trauma, and fitting that into a model in PNG where to fit the major health challenges there, which is, as I said earlier, snake bite, major trauma, obstetric and infant. So the next step, these guys finished their paramedic. They've all graduated from the first part of the course, and no one resat exams. So every student got 70% or above, and these were New South Wales tailored exams, which was, for me, a very proud moment. And it meant that we recruited the right people. So the EMTs, for your interest, are EMTs from our existing ambulance officers. And the paramedics are 4-year degree qualified with a degree in health science, rural practice. They are independent prescribers in PNG, and they are called health extension officers. The closest thing, they essentially are what we call a physician assistant. So they have independent prescribing practices, can do minor surgery. So for us, when we looked at their qualifications on paper and their capabilities, it was a very easy transition. So they're doing a 12-week program. 5 of it's led by New South Wales Ambulance. 2 weeks is led by the doctors and covers advanced obstetrics, TXA for trauma, advanced airways, and sepsis management, which again ties into infant mortality quite well. So that's what we've done with them. This is the graduating, they're graduating from their paramedic, so their pre-hospital care. I'm calling it paramedic training in the sense that, the frontline AMBO stuff, and the rest is now clinical stuff that they'll be doing. The EMTs spend 2 weeks in ED, 1 week in obstetrics, 1 week in pediatrics, and I think is 1 week in another faculty. And then they graduate as EMTs, so that they're ambulance officers essentially is what our old model would call them. And the paramedics do 3 weeks in operating theatres to get their ET. We're not emphasising ET, we're saying that ET is a secondary option, or is a last line of airway for when iGels fail or LMA. So collaboration for all these programs has been very closely tied with the doctors, nurses. And it's really, we've let the doctors take the lead on what they wanted to see as a package. And that's really helped us along the way. Without their support, I don't think this would have taken off at all. It just wouldn't have had the momentum. Other emergency services. So because of the work we've been doing, we've now been embedded into the Special Services Division of the Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary. And for the 6-week election period, we set up we'd call it a special operations type unit that passed a fitness test and got some briefing, and they've now embedded into the, as required, into the tactical operations unit for the RPNGC. And they spent 6 weeks during the election doing some incredible work and travelling around in the police's 5 helicopters, including 3 Bell 212s. And from that's grown the discussion that we're now having that they would like us to staff their helicopters with our newly graduated paramedics from time to time. So it won't be a dedicated model. I believe it will be similar to how New Zealand was running helicopters some time ago, where that you'd be called off-road to attend to a helicopter. And we're taking small steps, so that's what we're going to do initially. One of the other things we did this year, it took 1.5 years of work, but we signed an MOU with the fire service to say that we'll work collaboratively. It's very open-ended, but allows us to do a number of initiatives, and the first initiative is taking place today with the first joint training exercise that I'm aware of, where the graduates, the EMTs and the paramedics are doing a rescue simulation from a house fire, which is a big burden in PNG, believe it or not. House fires happen and there's tragic consequences from them. And road rescue as well is their scenario, and I think it's actually happening as we speak at the moment. So they're doing that, and it's all being filmed. The local news crews are there filming, and they're very excited about it too. So helping others board your ship, and I'm running out of time, so if I need to stop, let me know, but pretty soon, fantastic, all right. So getting others to board the ship was something that we worked hard on, and really my goal was to get the engagement of the Australian High Commission. When I first talked to them, they had no interest at all. 2 years later, to the date that my first meeting with the High Commission in Australia, the Australian High Commissioner came to our headquarters, and this is him talking with the in the background here, we have Ian Clough, who's our deputy chair, and he is the former general manager of Wesfarmers Australia. So if you know them, they're one of Australia's biggest companies. He's actually a Papua New Guinean born and bred third generation, and his family own sort of a PNG version of Harvey Norman and a few other things. And they're 3 generations of incredible support to St. John. And I think they've got 2 generations of Commander of the Order of St. John. So just incredible people, and we're so fortunate that the 3rd generations joined our board voluntarily. And as you all probably know, Alan Morrison and Dr. Sam Yokapua in the blue shirt is the Chief of Emergency Medicine and a major wheeler of power in Papua New Guinea, and incredible support, and he's our Chief Medical Officer. And Bobby Welsh is a council member now and our medical advisor. So with the support, we've been able to achieve some really good things and got some great support from, hopefully to come from the High Commission, and just some media engagement and getting on TV. So I think the future is hopefully bright over there. It's not an unsinkable ship. It's a ship that is going to need support, and that support's going to need to be over 10 years and longer. And I'm hopeful that someone can take over from me in a year and a half's time and do an even better job and really steer that. We're working on the moment on Australian government sponsored positions for 3 people, 3 paramedics with additional skills. So maybe a paramedic who's a manager or a paramedic who's an educator, so we can implement projects. And they're going to be 3 to 6 month rotations and tied to specific project deliveries. The advantage of them being paramedics is that they can also provide an additional layer of clinical support. We've got 7 Striker M1s, brand new, just been donated to us from our friends and through St. John Australia. And they are going to look fantastic in hopefully the 7 new ambulances that's currently being discussed. But actually getting those checks across is the big challenge for us. So they're on the way. And I think that's about all. So thanks for having me.